the United States, where they could easily have said, now that we've gotten to America, let's forget about what's happening in Nigeria, let's just continue, raise our family here, and that's it. Instead, they continue to fight against the dictators here. They organized in Chicago, in the state, and also across the country against the government, against corruption, against the anti-democratic forces that were alive and well in the country at that time. And they risked their lives even here. It was to the point where the government was sending people to our home when we lived out in the suburbs to intimidate and threaten our parents because of their activism. And yet they continued to do it because it was the right thing to do, because of those principles. And so that's my legacy. So I come out of that. I grew up with that. Where principles are important, where principles matter, and where it's not, you don't do things for convenience, you do things because they're the right thing to do. And we have to be willing to make sacrifices for advancing a just cause. And so that's how I got into this work of community and economic development. To a lot of people, it might seem that I was down in Champaign, I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana. Yes, there's always one. Every year I didn't say that. But I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana, and for me, the education is a tool. So you're supposed to use it as a tool for a certain end. So I don't believe, contrary to what it might seem, that it's just collecting degrees left and right. It's too expensive for that. But for me, I was seeing some things that didn't sit well with me. And so the reason why I got into journalism was because I wanted to understand people's stories and be able to tell people's stories, people who did not have a platform to speak or to explain who they were. The other thing that I was seeing was a lot of issues around education inequity. For us, our parents had stressed education because they felt that it was the best way for us to be upwardly mobile and to have a solid life in the United States. And yet, when I was in Central Illinois, I was seeing a school that had been reconstituted. In Chicago, they call it a turnaround. And I went to a board meeting. I was, I think, 18 years old at the time. And I saw teachers that were crying because they were all going to be fired and they were going to bring in a whole new staff into this school, in the school district. And so at 18, I began to ask these questions of what was going on. Not only did the reconstitution bother me, but it was also the fact that when we looked at the disparity in discipline, the achievement gap, and all of these inequities that I began to see in the community. Even though I was an undergrad, I was a college student, and while most of my peers were, having fun, I was thinking about these issues. And so that's why I studied journalism. It's why I went on to my master's in education. I saw the law as a tool. We have to be able to use tools effectively to battle against the forces in this system that would seek to keep us powerless. And so for me, getting the law degree was a way of being able to have something tangible to use in advancing a just agenda. So that's how I went to law school. And again, going on into educational policy was, how do we make sure that we have an educational system that is actually working in our interests, working on behalf of the communities, the children that come out of these communities, and how can we use that as a tool? So that was my lens. I always knew that I wasn't going to be an ivory tower academic. And so a lot of people thought that, oh, when you get your PhD, you'll just, you'll write articles, which is fine. But I always knew that I needed to be on the ground doing the work, applying everything that I had learned. And so for that reason, I went to work in City Hall. I worked in the mayor's office under Mayor Richard M. Daley. And because I knew that I had to have an understanding of how policy is made at the top level of city government. A lot of times we complain and we understand the issues as they affect us, but do we know how those decisions are being made? Who's at the table when those decisions are being made? And what tools can we use to make sure that we change that system if it's not working in our favor? So that's what led me to working in City Hall. And it was a fantastic learning experience. It was eye-opening. A lot of the stereotypes about Chicago government and Chicago politics I learned were true. But it reinforced for me that there was a clear disconnect between those who make policy and those who are impacted by policy. And I found that my colleagues, when I was in City Hall, they talk to each other, and you think because you talk to each other so much that this is the universe, and yet there's a whole universe outside of City Hall with people who are living in their communities every day. And I knew that there was a disconnect there. And so for me, my next step was definitely going to be in the community. I knew that I had to get to the ground level. Now that I had an understanding of top government decision making, I knew that the work was needed in the communities. So I decided to go to the west side. I went to Austin. And I went to Austin. Austin is the largest community in Chicago. It's the furthest west neighborhood. And if you look statistically, the number of foreclosures, the unemployment rate, just the public safety issues, there are a lot of issues there. But I went to Austin specifically because we rarely ever talked or engaged with the Austin community when I worked in City Hall. And so to be the largest community with the issues that that community was facing and to never talk about it in City Hall, I knew that that's where I needed to be, where the work is. That's always been my thing. I go where the work is. So I started working, I was leading a nonprofit in Austin. We were working with 150 other organizations, all saying that they work on behalf of the Austin community, trying to do community and economic development work, working around the schools. I was part of the community action councils, advocating against the school closings. I was working in manufacturing at the same time, trying to rebuild the middle class by getting individuals into these jobs that are available in the economy, and just doing all of that work. And I knew that I needed to expand, once I got into Austin, to other neighborhoods, because it just became very evident that there's so much work that needs to be done. So I expanded out, working in Austin, North Lawndale, West Humboldt Park, Little Village, and then I started working on the south side in Roseland, doing some work in Inglewood, and basically going where the work needed to be. And so for me, running for office, this is not just about me, this woman that's challenging the mayor. The message that I'm bringing is about transformative change in the city, and it's actually about every individual in the city recognizing the power that you already have. I believe that if the system is not working, I just feel a responsibility to do everything possible to change it. And so for me, running for office, it doesn't seem, or running for mayor, it actually doesn't seem extraordinary. I know it from a qualification standpoint that I'm well qualified. I know that the issues that we face are very urgent. I don't think that we have a lot of time in the city at the rate that things are going. Particularly if you live in South Shore, if you live in Inglewood, if you live in Austin. There are forces that are at work and plans that have been in place for decades. And your futures are not secure here if we don't change course in a very drastic way. And so for me, there's a sense of urgency around the issues that we face, and that's why this upcoming election is so important. But I also think that we have a responsibility to make sure that we have individuals who share our values that are being elected into office. So it's not just about the mayor, it's about all 50 of our aldermen, and making sure that we have leaders that reflect values of transparency, open government, of integrity, of equity and policy, and leaders that understand that their position is one of servanthood, that it's not to be in there for self-preservation, that we're blinded by the power and the title of being aldermen. They actually are there to serve their constituents. So until we decide that we're willing to break out of the status quo, that we are unafraid to challenge a system that is clearly not working in our interests, we're going to continue to see the decline that we've seen over the past few decades. We've already lost 250,000 residents, primarily from the south and west side, in the last 10 years. And that number is not slowing down. So I think that we have a unique opportunity as a city to step outside of the box, to not be afraid to do things that are bold and courageous. And that means that we can't think that we're going to do things in the traditional way and get different results. So one question that's come up a lot for me, well, why don't you run for alderman? Or why don't you spend 5 years in some other position and then work your way through and get this alderman to bless you and that? We're not going to get any different results if we have individuals that have already adopted the mindset of the status quo. So the first thing that we should be looking at is what are the values that drive leadership? What are the values that drive individuals who claim that they want to serve the public? What are their motives? If you're going through the usual channels, that means you've already adopted the mindset. So if I go and get the blessing of all of the aldermen, some of whom are not doing what they should be doing on behalf of their constituents, then I've already adopted the mindset and said that this system is okay. And so we cannot do that. But it requires us to not be afraid to step outside the box. It requires us to not be afraid or believe what I believe are the lies that the system would have us to believe, which is that we don't have power. I think we're all born with power. So we have it already. It's just a matter of us tapping into it. And when we do that collectively, that's how we have transformative change as a city. So that's my message. I think this is bigger than any one individual. It's bigger than me. And it requires all of us to collectively decide that we want something different for ourselves and ultimately for the city. So, thank you.
So we have time for some questions for Amara Enyia. So if you have a question, the way we'll do it is just whoever stands up first gets to talk, and then we'll do it that way. Okay? So we have just stand if you have a question. If you can introduce yourself. Introduce yourself to everybody too before you ask your question.
My name is Don Watchanabe, and I moved to South Shore from the north side of 68. Okay, what's your strategy in putting together both your campaign as well as your values?
Our strategy is people-driven. So for the campaign, we have to be out, and we are out in every community. We believe that the message is a unifying message. So we're saying that regardless of your socioeconomic status, regardless of your geography, regardless of your race or your ethnicity, that there is a better way for the city if we only unify. So we bring a unifying message to the city. But our strategy is that we're actually out in every community. There are 2,500, I think 2,500 precincts in the city, and we have bodies in our goal is to have bodies in every precinct of people who are talking about this message. We're knocking on doors. There's just certain things that you have to do. One thing that we do know is that in the last election, our current mayor didn't really have any ground game. He didn't really have to go out and actually knock on people's doors and talk to them about what he was about. He came in, and there was a lot of bluster for coming from the White House. And everyone just sort of said, oh, this is great, and that was it. And then he bought up all the media. So our strategy is one of engaging people and talking about our message, and they talk to other people about their message. And they're out in every community. So we're from the north side to the south side, west to the lake. That's how we're going to mobilize people around this message and get them engaged in the community. The other thing that we're really focusing on is on voter education and voter registration. We know that the only way that this current mayor wins is if people don't come out to vote. So the last election, we had maybe 325,000 people voted. And so the only low voter turnout favors incumbents. And so there are so many groups who have been marginalized by the current leadership, both at the mayoral level, the citywide level, but also in the wards, that we know that getting them registered and actually getting them out to vote on that day is critical. So that's the second part of our strategy, to make sure that we really increase voter turnout.
So I'd like to know what are your priority issues?
What's your name?
I'm sorry. I'm Dr. Delisha Kinney. I'm a photographer. I have my training was at SIU School of Medicine, and I'm from Champaign, Illinois. I recently transplanted here. I'm getting my master's of public health in May from Chicago State University, and I'm now in South Shore.
So my top priority issues, so education. I am a proponent of fully funded public neighborhood schools, first and foremost. That is absolutely critical. We have to make sure that we're fully funding our schools so that they have the resources that they need to be able to teach and so that students can learn. I support an elected school board. I think that we have, unfortunately, that the CPS needs a dose of democracy. Right now, CPS agenda is the mayor's agenda. And so what we see is a reflection of the mayor's priorities. So we need an elected school board to make sure that the decisions that come out of the school board are actually reflective of what the community wants, what the parents, teachers, and families who also live and work in communities want based on what they know and have experienced. So definitely an elected school board. I think that it's wrong to create a dual education system. So this notion of closing down 50 schools in the communities, but at the same time reopening charter schools in some of those same areas, I think it sends the wrong message. I think we should halt the opening of charter schools until we decide what we actually want to do. I think we have to prioritize our neighborhood public schools because there's accountability there, and every school, every person should have access to a high-quality school in their neighborhood. So I don't believe that we can create this dual education system, which is the track that we're on now, since we privatizing our educational system to for-profit entities who are benefiting while our children, families, and communities are suffering. So that's just a snapshot around education. And some of the other issues that are tangential to that is this issue of testing. I don't believe that testing, over-testing is effective. It's bad education policy. And for those who are in education, we know what works. The problem is that we end up doing, the city ends up doing what's politically expedient instead of what's actually sound from an education policy standpoint. So over-testing is just bad education policy. It tamps down on the enthusiasm of students. It creates a much more stressful learning environment where they're actually not learning, they're just being tested. And so we see that happening in so many schools in this city. I also think we need a curriculum that actually develops well-rounded individuals, not just test takers. So we need our students coming out prepared for life after their school. They need to be not just college ready, but they need to be career and workplace ready. And that's something that the mayor is fond of saying, that we want 100% college bound, or 100% college ready, 100% college bound. I think that's unrealistic. In the economy in which we live, that we have a variety of options for students when they leave high school. They should be either ready to go to college, they should be ready to work in some place with skills, or they should be ready to do both if that's what they want to do. So those are, from an education standpoint, those are my top priorities. From a financial standpoint, I believe in being, we cannot be beholden to the financial sector. So I believe that as a way of generating revenue for the city, the proposal of having a financial transaction tax, which is a tax on financial transactions in the market, so CME. That tax alone could generate billions of dollars in revenue, at least $2 billion of revenue for the city. The reason why we haven't done it yet is because our current mayor has too many ties in the financial community to take that step. But I don't believe that we can continue to plug our budget shortfall on the backs of middle income and low income residents, those of us who can least afford it. We can't continue to pay our taxes, but we're afraid to ask our partners in the financial sector to pay their fair share of taxes. So I also support our corporate partners paying their fair share of taxes. Right now, we give tax breaks. And a lot of times, some of those corporations don't necessarily create jobs for people who live in the city. And yet they're not paying into the city's coffers. So if we're really serious about making sure that we have revenue, we've got to make sure that our corporations